Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Today's episode is about the fun subject of brain damage. They say you've got to crack a few eggs to make an omelette, or in the case of early neurosurgery, you've got to crack a few heads to learn how the brain works. Even with modern technology, brain surgery comes with its risks, but back before we knew which parts of the brain did what, the probings of over-enthusiastic neurosurgeons could have profound and disturbing consequences. Henry Gustav Molaison discovered this the hard way. Henry Molaison was born in Hartford County, Connecticut in 1927. His life was fairly normal up until the age of 7. One day in 1935 he was playing outside when he was knocked over by a man on a bicycle, causing him to lose consciousness for about 5 minutes. After that he started having seizures. They were quite mild at first and life carried on as usual for Henry until the age of 16. Then the seizures started to become increasingly severe. On a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day, he would have seizures and blackouts. He worked for a while on an assembly line at Ace Electric Motor Company, but by the early 1950s he was having about 10 of these seizures a week and he became unable to work. Over the years, doctors had tried him on various anticonvulsant medications, but to no avail, and nothing seemed to stop his seizures. By the age of 27, it had gotten so bad that his quality of life was severely impacted. In desperation, he turned to Dr. William Beecher Scoville, the founder and director of the Department of Neurosurgery at Hartford Hospital. Dr. Scoville had pioneered an experimental surgery where he drilled into a patient's brain and removed sections of their temporal lobes, a sort of more advanced lobotomy. So far he had only performed the surgery on psychotic patients, but when Henry Molaison walked into his office, he thought the same procedure might be able to cure the seizures. Dr. Scoville had a hunch about which area of the brain was responsible for the seizures. In the human brain, the temporal lobe is located towards the bottom of the brain, behind the ears. There are 2 temporal lobes, one on each hemisphere of the brain. Deep within each temporal lobe is the hippocampus, a curved section known as the seahorse of the brain because of its resemblance to a certain aquatic creature. This hippocampus is what Dr. Scoville thought was causing the seizures, and therefore it needed to be removed. Henry was convinced to have the surgery, and so on September the 1st, 1953, he found himself lying on the operating table at Hartford Hospital. He was wide awake but anaesthetised enough that he wouldn't feel any of the pain as they drilled into his skull. 2 holes were made in his forehead just above the eyes. The frontal lobe of the brain was pushed upwards slightly so that the instruments could be pushed down into the lower part of the brain cavity. Using a blade that cauterized as it sliced, Dr. Scoville cut deep into each temporal lobe, deep enough to sever large sections of it, including the hippocampus. A tube was then used to suck the severed brain tissue out of Henry's head. After the surgery, Henry only had about 2 seizures a week. It seems Dr. Scoville's hunch was right. Removing the temporal lobes and the hippocampus had done the trick. However, there was one major side effect. See, back in 1953, obviously they didn't know as much about the brain as we do today. They didn't know, for instance, that the hippocampus plays an extremely important role in memory formation. After his surgery, Henry Molaison found himself completely unable to form new memories. A doctor visiting Henry after his surgery described how, although he seemingly had no impairment to his intellectual capabilities, he would forget things almost as soon as they occurred. Within 30 seconds of anything happening to Henry, he would forget all about it. He was cursed to live forever in the present moment. Imagine what that would be like. never being able to make new friends, never learning which new foods you like or dislike, never being able to follow the plot of a TV show or movie, having no concept of how much time has passed in your life, no sense of aging, no way to plan for the future. Every 30 seconds, your world resetting and starting afresh. In his own words, Henry described his existence like this: "It's like waking from a dream. Every day is alone in itself." Interestingly, although his ability to make new memories was gone, he still retained some memories from before the surgery. It was actually a pretty big discovery for neuroscience, proving that memories were formed and stored in different areas of the brain. His past memory wasn't completely intact though. He couldn't remember anything that had happened to him in the 3 years leading up to the surgery. It was as if those memories had been sucked right out of his head. Memories from up to 11 years before the surgery were hazy. Some things he remembered, some he didn't. He remembered all the things he'd learned during his childhood, teenage years and early 20s. However, he had no episodic memory from these times. The neuroscience professor Suzanne Corkin described his early life memory like this: "He had memories of his personal life with his parents and other relatives. He could tell you about roller skating, which he loved to do. He could tell you about target practice. He could tell you what kind of guns he had, where he went in the woods to do target practice. He could tell you about neighbours, classmates in school, what schools he went to. But what he couldn't do was tell you what happened at a particular time and place. He couldn't tell you, for example, 'I remember on my 10th birthday I spilled hot chocolate all over my white pants and my mother was furious at me.' We tried to get these specific detailed memories, episodic memories from him. He could not give one single episodic memory with one exception. On one of his birthdays, he remembers going in a small plane and flying around Hartford. This obviously had a huge emotional impact on him. He loved it. Without the ability to create new memories, Henry Molaison was basically housebound. He lived with his parents and spent his day doing basic tasks like mowing the lawn or watching television. Surprisingly, one of his favourite pastimes was doing crosswords. He retained most of his memory from his years in school, and a lot of what he'd learned helped him fill in the crosswords. He felt that doing the crosswords helped him by forcing him to remember what he'd learned from his early years of life. Despite his setbacks, Henry remained fairly upbeat about his situation. People that knew him remarked on his apparent good humour and ability to take things in his stride. For example, imagine he had a visitor in his house and they walked out of the room to use the toilet. When they re-entered the room, he would have forgotten who they were and why they were there. You might think that he would assume that they were an intruder, but he was intelligent enough to realise what was happening. He knew that they probably had a reason to be there. He simply accepted these strangers as friends. Interestingly, he was able to learn certain things. For example, he was repeatedly given a test where he had to draw a star shape on a piece of paper whilst looking only at the reflection of the paper in a mirror. After attempting this multiple times, he improved at the task, but each time he did it, he had no memory of ever having done the test before. It proved that his brain was still able to learn new motor skills despite not being able to remember doing the task. Again, it showed that different parts of the brain were responsible for different processes. Before Henry's surgery, it was thought that the entire cerebral cortex was engaged for memory and learning, rather than specific areas being used for specific functions. In another example of this, he'd moved into a new house after his surgery. Some years later, he was asked to draw a floor plan of this house, and he was able to do so quite accurately. Although he shouldn't really have been able to remember the house, his years of walking around it room to room had somehow imprinted the layout of the building in his mind, similar to his ability to learn new motor skills. Henry died in 2008. He was 82 years old. His life would have become increasingly lonely as he aged. The people from his past that he had memories of passing away and being replaced by new people who would remain strangers no matter how many times he met them. Although his story is tragic, his condition provided a unique insight into the formation of memories, and it revolutionized our understanding of the brain. Over his lifetime, he was studied by hundreds of neuroscientists, and his contribution to that field was invaluable. He even requested that his brain be donated to science after his death so that it could be further studied. What they did with his brain is pretty interesting, if a little gruesome. It was taken to the Brain Observatory in San Diego and put into a deep freeze. It was then cut into 2,401 individual slices, each 0.07 millimeters thick. I mean, look how thin that is. See, that's all surface area, and the taste has nowhere to hide. These slices were mounted on glass slides and dyed with a special ink. This enabled scientists to create a 3D image of Henry's brain and see exactly what damage had been done to it. What they found was somewhat surprising. There was much more of Henry's hippocampus intact than they thought, but the area that connected the hippocampus to the rest of the brain was removed. Its isolation from the rest of the brain is the reason why Henry couldn't form new memories. So that's the story of Henry Molaison and the dangers of cutting out random parts of a brain without really knowing what it does. I don't think I'd ever thought about how memories are stored in the brain in a certain place like a memory card, or that damaging it can erase a block of memories from a certain time frame. Anyway, thanks for watching, and apologies if I sound a bit funny. I've got a bit of a cold coming on. Thanks to everyone supporting the channel, and hopefully you're enjoying the content. Here's some more stuff you might like, and give them a click if you want, or I might show up in your recommended videos in the near future, so keep an eye out for that, and I'll see you there. Until next time, goodbye.